I find that this chapter 23 of First Chronicles, is really, in some way, a continuation of chapter 22. One thing this book has spoken a lot into, and maybe we'll capture that when we do the summary at the end, is in how we worship God. And in chapter 23, it starts with talking about the Levites again. If you remember, we've talked about this tribe called the Levites so many times in this book. Okay, it was a tribe that was set apart to serve God in the temple. In fact, the order given, if I can remind you, is that they were not to work on anything else except serving God in the temple. Yeah, I think that I just want to capture a few things for us from verse 13. Let me read verse 13 of chapter 23. I'll read from the Message version today. It says, Aaron was especially ordained to work in the Holy of Holies. Yeah, we remember Aaron, Moses' brother. To burn incense before God, to serve God, and bless his name always. This was a permanent appointment for Aaron and his sons. Okay? And Moses and his sons were counted in the tribe of Levi. So, a reminder, because we've said this maybe more than 2 times before, this tribe, it just shows you worship was so important to God that he designated an entire tribe to take charge of it. Yeah, super important to him. Okay, and then verse 24 brings out their role, and it says this. I'll read again from the Message version. These are the sons of Levi, 20 years and older, divided up according to families and heads of families, and listed in the work groups that took care of the worship in the sanctuary of God. That was their work. Their role was to take care of worship in God's sanctuary. So this is the thing that we see here. Worship was really important to God. He designated an entire tribe to take care of it. And then there was a prescribed way. There was an orderly way that they were meant to do this worship, right? I think if we continue reading, we see this happening all the way through. This chapter is about painting that picture. Verse 28, it says, From now on, the assigned work of the Levites was to assist Aaron's sons in the work of worship in God's house, maintaining courtyards and closets, keeping the furniture and utensils of worship clean, take care of any extra work needed in the work of worship, provide bread for the table, flour for the meal offerings, and unraised wafers, all baking and mixing, all measuring and weighing. Also, they were to be present for morning prayers, thanking and praising God, for evening prayers, and at the service of whole burnt offerings to God on Sabbath, at the new moons and at all festivals. They were on regular duty to serve God according to their assignment and their required number. Are you seeing that? I don't even have so much to say about this chapter because it's very self-explanatory. This whole tribe was dedicated to serving God. And I think it must push us. It's the same thing we said in the previous chapter. It must push us in this chapter for us to ask, if God really saw this worship as such an important thing that he designated a whole tribe for it, how much order, how much resource do we put into our worship of God? Okay, how disciplined and orderly are we about it? God was so disciplined. God was so clear that he designated. He said, this tribe, and then he said, this is the way that I want to be worshipped. Through the whole book, we are seeing he's so orderly. He's like, these guys are meant to do this, and these guys are meant to do this. And it must force us to be like, okay, maybe we have to get to a place where we are not haphazard about our worship of God, about our pursuit of God. There's some intentionality and organization we must bring alongside it. Okay? This thing can't just happen haphazardly. If God took time to designate an entire tribe, to choose the best and say, these are the ones who are going to do this work for me, and then if God took time to be specific, then you and I must look at ourselves and be like, how disciplined, intentional, and orderly are we about our worship to God? Yeah? Can we set aside resources? And by resources, by the way, I rarely ever mean money. I normally mean like mostly time. Time is a resource, Time is the resource that we have in our hands to set aside and be like, I will set aside time to worship God. And this must challenge us to look, what are your daily patterns of worship? Okay, what are your weekly patterns of worship? Maybe you need to get to a place where you're like, okay, every single day, I'm going to spend this amount of time seeking after God. Every single week, I'm going to do these activities. Maybe there's a small group that you must set aside time to go to, some 2-3 hours once a week, and just spend time there to be in the presence of God and the presence of other men and women who are pursuing God, so that they can edify you and encourage you in your journey, right? Another weekly practice is maybe you have to designate time and say, I need to be in church, 2 hours every Sunday, 3 hours every Sunday, depending on where you go to church and what that looks like. That is important. And this is what we are talking about, setting aside resources. And the resource that we have the most in our hands is time. The resource that God is always asking us to put aside so that we can find Him is time. Invest time to seek God. Do not be in a hurry all the time. 15 minutes, and all the 15 minutes is you who's laid down your requests before God. You've not even taken time to be quiet, to listen to Him, speak to you, and tell you, this is what I would like you to do. This is what I would like you to work on. This is where I think you are, and I need you to look at this situation like this. So we must take time to be in the presence of God, and it's a resource that we must learn to invest so that we can be able to catch the heart of God, to move and to allow our lives to move at the pace of God, in the intentions and the will that He has for us. So this chapter really is a continuation from chapter 22, and I hope we see it that way. It speaks into our worship. It speaks into the importance of worship. It shows us the resource God puts into worship. It shows us the intentionality and order God puts into worship. And it must force us and push us to get to the same place where we have the same intentionality, the same order, the same discipline, and we put in the same resource so that we can worship God in the way that He deserves to be. Thank you so much for listening. I'm enjoying speaking to you, and I hope that these chapters are blessing you and helping you catch a heart and a passion for God like never before. God bless you. Bye.